Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. Robert Harrison watched the video on his laptop in grim silence. On the screen, a petite blonde woman in her early 50s entered the room in the arms of a tall, muscular man. Her short hair was styled in the playful curls he knew so well. She was smiling as she ran her hand across her lover's chest, her expression filled with eager anticipation. The man was tall and considerably younger than her. He had dark, closely cropped hair, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. Rob estimated the guy stood a few inches taller than his own 5'10" frame and carried about the same weight. But when the young man pulled his shirt over his head and tossed it to the floor, it became clear he had very little body fat. His physique was lean and well-defined, the body of someone who lived at the gym. The couple had barely entered the room before the young man began kissing her. She offered no resistance as he began to undress her. Rob bitterly recognized the matching lingerie set. It was the elegant ensemble Diane had worn last month on the night of their anniversary. Their 25th anniversary. He'd wanted to make it special. After a nice dinner at Higgins with their daughter Sarah and her husband Chris, Rob had taken his wife dancing at a boutique club in the Pearl District. After sharing many romantic dances, they'd procured a room at a nearby luxury hotel. They were pleasantly tipsy and made love as they had for the past 27 years. 25 of them as husband and wife. Rob savored the memory of that night. Diane's slender body had been revealed when she slid out of her dress at the foot of their hotel bed. She'd smiled invitingly as she performed a playful dance, twirling around to display her new matching set. He'd been very pleased with her choice. The rose-colored fabric had complemented her flawless, pale complexion beautifully. Now those cherished memories were ruined. Bile rose in his throat as Rob forced himself to watch the rest of his wife's betrayal. The tall man carried her across the cabin's small living room and set her on the sofa. Diane quickly repositioned herself, and the man watched her with a smug expression as she eagerly reciprocated his attention. What followed made Rob look away briefly. When he forced himself to look back, Diane's face, though partially obscured, betrayed her frantic state. Despite the rough nature of their encounter, her expression held an intensity that shocked him. He'd never realized there was such a side to her personality. He'd always considered her a respectable, somewhat reserved wife. The intimate relations they'd enjoyed over the years had been gentle and loving. In the aftermath of their quiet lovemaking, Diane had always expressed how pleased she was with their tender relationship and the care with which he treated her. Afterward they'd cuddle, and Diane frequently mentioned how contented she always felt after they made love. What he was watching now was nothing like that. This was primal rather than tender. There was no tenderness at all, just raw physical passion between two people seeking pleasure. The video proved she was receiving something from this man that he could apparently never give her. It was depressing, but from the visible reactions on the screen, Rob knew it was true. He was concentrating so intently on the video that he barely noticed his cell phone beep, indicating a text. It was his wife. He paused the video and read the message. Going straight to the store from work. Want anything special for dinner? Rob texted back. Nothing special. See you when you get home. He almost typed, love you, at the end. But after watching her blatantly violating their marriage vows, his heart had turned bitter and cold. She texted back, okay, see you at home. Love you, baby. Yeah, right? He whispered bitterly. He checked the time and knew she'd be home in about an hour. Diane was 52 years old, working as an administrative assistant a few miles away at the admissions department of Portland Community College's Sylvania campus. She'd worked there for a few years after leaving her previous job as a secretary for a small accounting firm in Beaverton. She went to work later than Rob and got off later, so he was usually home before her unless he had to work overtime. Robert Harrison was a 55-year-old financial analyst, working at his firm in downtown Portland for the past dozen years. His job was stressful at times. Some of the firm's clients were well-off business owners, understandably concerned about their investments and retirement accounts. He devoted all his energy and concentration to his clients during working hours. He also had to travel on occasion, which was how he'd finally discovered his wife's infidelity a few months ago. He'd just finished one of his required business trips to Seattle. He usually flew, but he'd driven this time instead. It was a reasonable distance from Portland, and with the hassle of airport security and the time spent getting to and from airports, driving wasn't much longer. On the way home, he'd decided on the spur of the moment to stop by the old cabin he and Diane owned to check on it. It was a small, rustic one-bedroom vacation cabin in the Cascade foothills, about 45 minutes east of their home in Lake Oswego. The cabin had electricity, a working well, a small propane stove for cooking, and a fireplace for heat. Other than that, it was without many amenities. Diane's late father had owned it originally, and her mother had left it to Diane after she passed away. Since they'd acquired it, they'd only stayed there 3 times in 10 years. The last time had been 2 years ago, when they'd spent a quiet weekend of solitude there, walking around the nearby lake and enjoying the peaceful mountain air. Since they almost never used it, Rob had been thinking about selling it. He knew they wouldn't get much. It wasn't in the best condition, but it was located near a scenic lake on 1 acre of land in a small cluster of similar cabins. Unfortunately, it had no real security, just a chain-link fence stretched across the dirt road leading to the group of cabins. A retired farmer had owned the land and built the small community of cabins years ago, selling them to fund his retirement. Rob simply wanted to take a few minutes to make sure no one was squatting at the property or had broken in and vandalized the place. As he drove up the long dirt road, he wondered who would want such a remote, rustic cabin. Maybe some hunters, he thought, or an older couple like them who'd use it for a weekend getaway. They kept the key hidden under a specific rock in the small garden area by the front door. Rob used that key for entry. Once inside, he checked the water and found that the well was still working properly. It was when he used the bathroom that he noticed something odd. The shower curtain wasn't pushed all the way to the side of the tub. It was unusual because he specifically remembered pushing it completely to the side the last time they were there. The sink also had faint soap residue around the drain, as if it had been used recently. The stains were faint, but they were there, and he knew he'd cleaned it before they left. Suddenly, Rob's internal alarm went off. Someone must have been staying here since he and Diane were here 2 years ago. He continued his investigation and found that nothing was broken or missing, but Rob was certain someone had moved some of the chairs around the kitchen table. There were a few other minor things different in the bedroom as well. He checked around the grounds but didn't see anything else unusual. There were faint tire tracks in the dirt driveway, but it was impossible to determine how long they'd been there. The other cabins in the small cluster were all empty. Except for the tracks in his driveway, it looked like no one had visited the tiny community in years. After half an hour of investigating, Rob was wondering what to make of it. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Had Diane come here and forgotten to tell him? It was hard to believe. He was sure that if she'd been here, she would have mentioned it. But he had to accept that someone had been here. If a squatter had broken in, why wasn't a window broken or a door forced open? Why wasn't the fireplace dirty or the countertop cluttered? Why was nothing significantly out of place? Certainly, if rough types had invaded the place, they would have left it a mess and wouldn't have taken care to put everything back in its proper place. The shower curtain was nearly in the right position, just not pushed all the way to the side of the tub. Whoever had been here had taken time to make sure the cabin looked untouched. It was only because of his meticulous nature that Rob knew exactly how he'd left things. For some strange reason, he decided not to tell Diane. He wasn't normally a suspicious person, but something didn't add up. He didn't know why he felt this way. He trusted his wife. He'd loved and trusted her for decades. But it was just too strange an occurrence to eliminate the possibility that she had some knowledge about this and wasn't telling him. He didn't want it to sound like he didn't trust her, since it was just a hunch. He needed more information before asking her about it. After that strange visit, Rob went to an electronics store in Beaverton and purchased an expensive set of high-definition surveillance cameras. He mounted them in discrete locations, one to view the porch area, one in the living room that would also capture the kitchen, and the last one placed in the bedroom, angled so it could see into the bathroom if the door was open. Without telling Diane about his plans, Rob began driving to the cabin each weekend to check the recordings. Since he could drive to the cabin and back in 2 hours, It was easy to give his wife some trivial excuse about his absence. Actually, she was gone more than he was, shopping with friends or visiting her sister in Gresham. She also spent a lot of time at the health club she joined last year. She'd started a rigorous exercise program, resulting in losing almost 15 pounds and toning up her already slim figure. Rob had to admit that she did look good for her age. The video cameras were motion activated, so the first 2 times he went to the cabin, there was nothing recorded. He was beginning to think he was just wasting his time checking them. But on the 3rd visit, the cameras had captured something. He was so curious about who might be trespassing that he downloaded the footage right away and began viewing it at the kitchen table before leaving for home. His heart turned to stone when he saw his bottle-blonde wife and a tall man half her age get out of a sports car in front of the cabin. They were smiling and laughing like old friends as they walked up to the door, hand in hand. As she'd done many times in the past, Diane retrieved the key from under the rock and let them in. Rob's fists were clenched as he watched them enter the cabin. His wife never looked back, never showed any hesitation. She was clearly comfortable with this man, comfortable enough to bring him to their private family cabin. The camera inside captured them entering the living room. The young man immediately pulled Diane close and began kissing her. She responded eagerly, wrapping her arms around his neck. Within moments, they were undressing each other with practiced ease. Rob watched in stunned horror as his wife of 25 years, made love to a stranger on the sofa he'd helped carry into that cabin a decade ago. He couldn't watch the entire encounter. He fast-forwarded through parts of it, his stomach churning with nausea and rage. When it was over, he watched them lie together on the sofa for a while, talking and laughing. Eventually, they dressed, Diane carefully straightened up the cabin, and they left together, still holding hands. Rob sat at that kitchen table for a long time after the video ended. His hands were shaking. His mind was reeling. Part of him wanted to believe there was some mistake, some explanation. But there was none. He rewound the video and checked the date stamp. This had happened 3 weeks ago, while he'd been working late at the office one Thursday evening. Before leaving the cabin, Rob made sure everything was exactly as it had been when he arrived, so Diane wouldn't know he'd been there. He had every reason to believe this wasn't the first time she'd used the cabin for her affair, and he suspected it probably wouldn't be the last. He made sure the cameras were still working properly and left, heartbroken. Of course, every fiber of his being wanted to go home, confront his wife, and throw the young man out of their lives forever. During the ride home, he managed to get his anger under control, at least enough to think rationally. Until an hour ago, he hadn't had the slightest clue she was unfaithful. He'd loved her unconditionally and always assumed she felt the same toward him. They'd often discussed infidelity in conversations about friends or news stories, and Rob had believed she felt as he did about adultery. Now he knew differently. He knew he needed more information before losing control entirely. His late father had always told him not to react blindly without thinking things through. But his dad had never had to handle something like this. How could she do this to him? All the way home, Rob racked his brain for some tiny shred of hope for his crumbling marriage. As the miles went by, disturbing questions filled his mind. Was this the only time she'd cheated? The familiar manner she'd behaved with that man made it doubtful. But what if it was? The recording had no sound, so he didn't know what they'd talked about. Did he really want to trash a 25-year marriage over a one-time lapse in judgment? She'd been a great wife up until an hour ago. At least he'd thought so. He knew he was angry at her, but at the same time he still loved her. That was why her betrayal hurt so much. One question really hit him hard. If he divorced her, how could he ever replace her? He was 55 years old, for heaven's sake. He was a bit overweight, not wealthy, and certainly no Casanova. He wasn't bad-looking for his age, but it was clear his bedroom skills weren't enough to keep his wife faithful. Of course, Diane could still attract men. The video was proof of that. Diane was still a nice-looking older woman with a good figure. There were probably lots of men who would be interested in her. But what about him? At 55, he wasn't such a great catch anymore. The prospects of finding someone like her again seemed negligible. It was with these thoughts weighing on him that he arrived home. Thankfully, Diane wasn't there. She'd left a note on the kitchen table saying she'd be out shopping for a while and wouldn't be home until dinner. Rob ripped up the note in anger, wondering bitterly if she was just out with that man again. That had been over a month ago. Since then, he'd retrieved 2 more videos of her at the cabin with the same man. The latest was the one he'd just watched, the one that had finally pushed him to the breaking point. It was no one-time mistake. All 3 videos showed her with the same guy. Once he'd obtained the first recording of her affair, Rob had managed to keep his composure. He'd forced himself to behave normally around his wayward wife. Now that he knew she was cheating, he paid much more attention to her clothing, what she was doing, and where she went. He made it a point to find out as much about her daily activities as he could. Rob decided against hiring a private detective. If things went as he hoped, he didn't want anyone to suspect he knew about her affair. Instead, he discreetly placed a GPS tracking device in Diane's car, and when she went on her daily errands, he monitored her location on his computer. Other than going to work, all of her activities seemed normal: shopping trips to Fred Meyer, errands to the mall, and other routine tasks. After tracking her for a week, he didn't think her affair involved someone at her job. He took a day off a couple of times and followed her after she left work. She always went straight home, except on her workout days. Other than shopping, the only place she spent significant time outside of home was at her health club in downtown Portland. So he focused his attention there. For the past few months, Rob had noticed that Diane had substantially increased the amount of time she spent working out. Now he knew why. Rob had actually been pleased when she'd mentioned she was joining a workout class at the athletic club. He'd encouraged her, and after a couple of months, he'd seen definite improvement in her muscle tone. She'd always had a trim, slim figure, ate healthfully, and was never overweight. But after a few months of steadily working out, she'd lost a few pounds and achieved a noticeably more toned physique. He'd complimented her on her determination to maintain such a rigorous workout schedule. What a fool he'd been. Now he suspected the health club as the source of her affair. The man in the video was certainly a gym enthusiast, as evidenced by his muscular, well-defined body. Rob made it a point to follow her from work one day and arrived at the club before she did. He watched her enter the building. He could even see her working out through the large windows that faced the street. The building was well lit and designed to showcase its active members. He sat in his car, parked at a discreet distance, and watched her interacting with the staff. It didn't take long to see how friendly she was with a particular young man, one with short dark hair and an impressive build that matched the man in the video. Rob snapped some pictures with his digital camera. He waited for her to finish and watched as she walked out the front door. The young man went with her, and they exchanged a few words as they stood by her car. It was a friendly conversation and seemed normal enough. They were comfortable chatting, and whatever the man said made Diane laugh. She placed her hand on his arm as they talked. When she was about to leave, he slipped his arm around her waist and gave her a quick peck on the cheek. Diane was smiling as she gazed up at him with an adoring look. Rob drove home, locked himself in his home office, and looked up the man on the athletic club's website. His name was Tyler Brennan, 28 years old, employed as a personal trainer. The next few days found Rob sitting in his car near the health club. He watched Tyler flirt with Diane whenever she arrived, and the trainer paid her considerable attention when she worked out. He also escorted her to her car when she left. It was obvious they were very familiar with each other. The guy seemed to flirt with multiple women and was no doubt a player. Diane seemed to be his current target. Despite the age difference, Diane was a decent-looking mature woman. He'd probably flirted with her during her workouts, found her receptive to his advances, and pursued her. Once they became involved, it was no doubt Diane's idea to use the cabin as their meeting place. Rob grudgingly appreciated his calculating wife's choice. Using their house for the affair was obviously dangerous. There were nosy neighbors and Rob was home so often. There was also the chance they'd leave some telltale evidence of their activities. A motel would leave a paper trail, and if the motel was local, someone might see them entering or leaving and report back to her husband. On the other hand, the cabin was remote, free to use, and located far from home. Diane knew her husband never went there. As long as she kept the place in pristine condition, Rob would never know about all the time she was spending there with her lover. It was a perfect location for an affair. If he hadn't decided to check on the place after his business trip, he still wouldn't have any idea of his wife's betrayal. During the weeks since he'd acquired the first video, Rob had somehow managed to conceal his bitterness. It was difficult not to confront her, not to demand answers. The only way he controlled himself was to leave the house whenever he felt himself losing composure. Despite his anger, he was determined not to reveal his secret just yet. He needed time to make the arrangements he required. After watching the latest video, the one showing Diane in such an abandoned state, he was seething. He'd somehow managed not to explode at her, even after watching how eagerly she was allowing this man to use her. It was obvious she had no intention of ending the affair. On the contrary, she seemed to be relishing her adulterous activities more than ever. Realistically, though, even if she had ended it, Rob doubted he could continue living with her. From the first time he'd witnessed her infidelity, he couldn't see how their marriage could survive. He couldn't imagine why she was treating him with such disrespect. No matter how many times she might apologize, Rob didn't think he could ever get over his anger. Of course, hiding his knowledge and maintaining a normal lifestyle did give him time to take precautions. As a financial analyst, he knew how to protect himself in a divorce. He'd quietly moved a substantial amount of money into separate accounts, making it unlikely that she would get half of their combined assets in a settlement. He would have liked to leave her penniless, but he knew from experience with clients that wasn't legally possible. He tried to figure out a way to punish his wife and harm her lover, but such drastic options just weren't realistic. He wasn't normally a violent person, and the police weren't fools. Any overt violence perpetrated against Tyler Brennan or his lying, cheating wife, and they'd immediately suspect him. He was bitterly, nearly insanely, angry, but he wasn't some covert operative or organized crime figure with criminal connections. He was just a working man trying to do the best for his family. A normal guy stuck with a wife who apparently needed more than he could offer. He planned his response carefully. He would divorce her and try living as a single man. Not a pleasant thought, but what else could he do? He heard a noise and knew she was home. Rob felt his stomach tighten when he heard his wife's car pull into the garage. He had to work hard to force down his anger, to appear ignorant, playing the role he'd assumed for the time being. She entered the kitchen from the garage and Rob was on guard. He used to love having her come home, knowing she was his partner in life. Now that sense of comfort was a bitter contradiction. As usual, she looked great. She wore a fitted navy skirt, modest heels, and a sleeveless blouse. The outfit was professional and appropriate for her job, subdued but stylish. It displayed her slender, toned arms and legs, as well as her curvy figure. He'd always thought she looked like an attractive, professional woman, put together and confident, with her short, styled hair, fit body, and pleasant smile. "Hi, honey," she said brightly. "How are you doing?" She walked in with a bag of groceries under her arm. She crossed the kitchen, set the bag on the table, and leaned up to him for a kiss. "Hi, Diane," he said, accepting her kiss on the cheek. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "Because I'm starving. I bought some steaks. Why don't you heat up the grill and I'll fix a salad?" "That sounds good," Rob answered pleasantly. "I'll get it started right now." He pasted a calm expression on his face and went out on the deck to handle the grill. It was more difficult to remain composed after watching her latest video. He used to love it when she got home so they could eat, share their day, and spend the evening together. Now he no longer saw her in such a favorable light, and her presence was upsetting. He didn't even consider her his wife anymore, just someone playing a role, performing for an audience of one. Still, Rob had to admire her acting abilities. After betraying him in the most devastating way a wife can, Diane came home each day with a smile on her face, a relaxed attitude, and a loving facade. If you didn't know better, you'd assume she was a typical, faithful wife, the same devoted wife he'd always believed she was. Of course, they were both playing roles now, but she was so much better at it. For him, the strain of putting on such a fake show was nearly unbearable. Dozens of times over the past few weeks, He'd nearly cracked under the pressure and exploded his anger at her. Somehow, he'd managed to hold himself back. It was fascinating that she was able to compartmentalize her conflicting lives. On one hand, she was cheating on him regularly. Once home, she pretended to be a normal, faithful wife, as loving and attentive as she'd ever been. Rob could discern no visible effect of her affair, no evidence that she was now giving herself to another man on a regular basis. What was more confusing was that Diane was now offering him intimacy more frequently, whereas before her affair, he'd practically had to beg for her attention. Now she was sliding next to him in bed, stroking his back and whispering encouragement before they went to sleep. He'd even awakened one morning to find her being affectionate, trying to initiate closeness before he had to leave for work. Rob knew she was just providing obligatory intimacy to her unsuspecting husband, probably to soothe whatever guilt she might be feeling. But after watching her passionate encounters with that young man, he doubted there was much guilt remaining. In the past, he'd always considered her a truthful person. But now she'd acquired the ability to lie very convincingly, to conceal her affair without a hint of deception. Rob finished cooking the steaks, and they ate with little conversation. They spoke briefly about some trivial topics, but for the most part, their dinner was a quiet affair. Diane seemed a little tentative. She ate sparingly and kept glancing over at him, as if trying to read his thoughts. Rob simply stayed quiet because he didn't trust himself not to say something that would give him away. They sometimes had coffee and dessert after their meal, but not tonight. Once he finished eating, Rob needed to get away. He quickly cleaned up and went to the living room to watch television. Diane came out soon after with a glass of wine and sat down on the sofa right next to him. Feeling her eyes on him, Rob wished he'd just gone to his office after dinner, as he sometimes did. It would look suspicious if he got up and left now. "Is everything okay, Rob?" she asked during a commercial. Rob felt his stomach tighten. She suspected something. He tried to keep himself from tensing up. He flashed a brief smile and answered calmly, "I'm fine. You seem a little tense today," she said, rubbing his arm. She asked in a sweet tone, "Is something at work bothering you, honey? I get that way too sometimes. If there is, you can tell me about it. You know I'm interested in what you do." His voice cracked slightly as he replied, "No, I'm fine. Really." He should have ended the discussion right there, but the urge to say something, anything, was overwhelming. "Why would you ask me that?" he said, keeping his eyes fixed on the television. "I don't know. I guess." She stumbled over her words, moved closer, and stroked his arm affectionately. "Maybe we need some time together, you know? I mean, we haven't been together in a while." Rob nearly choked. "Really? Yeah." With a nervous giggle, she added, "I miss you, honey. I'm starting to wonder if you're still attracted to me, Rob." She said it as a joke and chuckled to make him think so, but after decades of intimacy together, there was no way either of them thought her concern was humorous. When his responding chuckle sounded forced, she looked at him with concern as he managed to say, "You, no, I am." They both laughed nervously, but it didn't sound genuine in the least. She turned her attention back to the television, and both of them sat in tense silence. Before her affair, Rob had hinted at intimacy regularly, and most of the time she'd declined. He'd never thought too much about it. On the rare occasions when she'd initiated, he'd never refused her, not once. Of course, her hints had been more subtle than his. A smile at the right time, a suggestive touch, or a playful kiss as she settled onto his lap. It was all it took, and he'd be following her to the bedroom eagerly. It had been so easy before. Now he knew she was sharing herself with another man. Where once he'd been eager, almost desperate, for her attention, now he held back. Since her invitations had always been so rare, the lack of physical intimacy between them wasn't immediately noticeable. But after so many weeks without any closeness, even Diane was starting to realize their relationship wasn't just infrequent. It was non-existent. They were living like roommates now, not lovers, and she was starting to notice. Rob was afraid he wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. They hadn't been intimate in weeks, and knowing what she was doing behind his back left him feeling conflicted and frustrated. She was passionate with her lover but had never been particularly adventurous with him in the past. It had taken her quite a while to warm up to intimacy when they were first together, and even after years of marriage, she'd rarely initiated. Now, with her transformed body and all her new experiences, she could be very enticing when she wanted to be. Thank God his plans were nearly complete. Despite her suggestive behavior tonight, Rob was determined to hold out. He wasn't going to compete with her new lover. Any physical intimacy between them now would only leave her disappointed. He was sure of it. After watching her intense reactions to the other man, he knew she'd never responded to him that way during their entire marriage. Over the past month, he'd simply forced himself not to respond to her hints. If she made a suggestive comment, he pretended not to hear it. In bed, he kept as much distance as possible between them and pretended to fall asleep immediately. Realistically, he knew he couldn't keep ignoring her forever. They'd always enjoyed a modest but decent intimate life together. He used to think so anyway, but after watching her wild abandon on the video, he'd totally lost confidence that he could satisfy her. Sure, she might pretend to enjoy his attention and probably fake satisfaction, but it would all be a lie. He didn't want to be in an unfavorable position, trying to give her what he knew she wanted and what he couldn't provide. She'd never responded as intensely with him as she had with Tyler Brennan. He knew she never would. Next to him, Diane sighed and said, "I just thought you might, want to go to bed a little early tonight. Are you tired?" "No, silly," she giggled nervously, playfully slapping his arm. "I mean, do you want to, go to bed now and maybe, Yeah, he knew. Rob could feel himself starting to perspire. His body was stirring despite his resolve, and he could feel his face getting warm. He knew she was watching him, wondering why he wasn't responding normally, why he wasn't reacting favorably to her obvious invitation. "Maybe in a while," he finally replied in an even tone. "Go on up, honey. I want to watch this show for a bit longer." She made a sound of disappointment. He could feel her warmth pressing against him. The scent of her blonde hair and the light fragrance of her perfume were familiar and intoxicating. He knew what she had to offer. He couldn't forget how delightful she'd been in bed over the years. He tried to ignore his conflicted feelings and didn't look at her face, so he wouldn't see her confused expression. He wished he could simply turn off his desire for her, but after so many years of loving her, it was impossible. She turned her attention back to the television, confused by his reluctance. She was a bit stung by his rejection. Let her feel rejected for once, Rob thought to himself. The show hadn't yet finished when Diane let out a long yawn. She stretched her arms over her head, purposely allowing her shirt to pull tight against her chest, a gesture designed to get him to notice her. Tonight, he just kept staring at the television. When he didn't react to her obvious display, Diane sighed. "Oh well, I'm a little tired, honey. I guess I'm heading up now. Do you want to come up?" It was a blatant invitation, one he hadn't heard in years. "I'll be up soon," he replied indifferently. "Oh, okay. Just wake me when you come up," she said, adding, "I probably won't be asleep right away." "All right. See you soon." She gave him a long, searching look, kissed his cheek, rose from her seat, and went to the bedroom. Rob breathed a sigh of relief. He stayed in the living room for 3 more hours. It was after 1 o'clock in the morning before he tiptoed to the bedroom door and peeked into the room to make sure she was sleeping. He removed his clothes and joined her in bed. Sleep was difficult and he woke up early, still feeling tired. She was still sleeping when he slipped out of bed, gathered his clothes, and went to the guest room to dress so he wouldn't wake her. He was frustrated but held on to his pride. He wasn't going to be intimate with her while she was cheating. He longed for the old days when he could just slide next to his wife, initiate closeness, and share affection with her without all this mental baggage. But she'd started this, and he wasn't going to reward her by acting normal. If she wanted physical attention so badly, she could go see her lover. She'd chosen to be his plaything, and it wasn't Rob's job to make her happy anymore. The atmosphere around their house grew increasingly tense. Diane was confused and wondered if something was wrong, because she and Rob barely spoke anymore. He did speak to her at times, usually during dinner, but there was little affection, and he never initiated physical contact anymore. If she hugged him, he would stiffen. Other times, he would flinch if she touched his arm or shoulder. Something was clearly bothering him, but he wouldn't say what. She tried to draw him out, but he just deflected her concerns or changed the subject. She used to feel his love through his actions and kind words. Now she knew they'd lost an important connection. She'd never found him this difficult to talk to. The next night, Diane made another attempt to seduce him. As before, he remained unresponsive. She wondered briefly if he knew about her affair, but quickly dismissed that possibility. She and Tyler had been so discreet. Only the people at her health club knew that she even knew him, and during her workouts, they acted friendly but appropriate to avoid suspicion. Whatever physical contact they enjoyed was away from the club and anyone they knew. The intimate time she spent with her young lover was reserved for her visits to her father's old cabin in the mountains. Diane was concerned about Rob's behavior, but not overly so. She still loved him, and if he was dealing with some issue, she wanted to be sympathetic. She did her best to be available if he wanted to confide in her. Whatever was wrong, she never assumed it would jeopardize their marriage. It must be some problem at work, she thought, a situation that came up occasionally with difficult clients. She was disappointed they hadn't made love in so long. She had to believe that he was becoming frustrated, but that wasn't her fault. She'd offered herself more in the last month than she had in years. And she certainly wasn't particularly frustrated, not with all the incredible experiences she'd been having with Tyler. Even so, she didn't want Rob to feel neglected, and she wondered why he didn't want her anymore. Was he no longer attracted to her? That didn't seem possible. She was in better shape than she'd been in years. He was getting older. Maybe he was already losing his interest and wasn't interested in physical intimacy anymore. It was ironic that while Rob's interest seemed to be cooling, hers was heating up. Lately, she'd been attracting attention from younger men by the dozens. Her new, improved figure hadn't gone unnoticed by any of the men where she worked. Being around college students most of the day, Diane found herself being approached regularly. So many young men were chatting her up that she had to be careful to maintain professional boundaries and not encourage them. With her lover on the side, she was getting her needs satisfied, but she wanted her husband to be happy too. Their relationship had never been particularly exciting physically, so she wasn't too concerned that he was acting distant. She would just continue to be the loving, supportive wife she'd always been with Rob and save her more passionate side for her young, attractive lover. Diane knew her affair would cool off eventually, but at the moment, it was still going strong. Whenever she had a chance, she'd meet Tyler at the cabin, where they would enjoy a couple of hours together. Then she'd clean up and return to her normal, rather routine but secure life with her older, unsuspecting husband. Once she and Tyler finished their time together, she'd clean up everything meticulously, making sure nothing would betray their presence. In the remote possibility that Rob might visit the cabin, she insisted on using the sofa, the kitchen table, or the floor, anywhere that she could clean up easily. They never used the bed, where the chance of leaving evidence could expose her. It was a perfect arrangement, and despite Rob's strange behavior, she wasn't giving it up. As the next week went by, Rob's apathetic attitude continued to bother her. She wondered if he suspected something was wrong and decided to take a break from her affair, just for a while until her husband returned to normal. She told Tyler they needed a break, and he was disappointed to hear it. He thought she was worried about nothing but went along with her decision anyway. By the second week of their break, she was having trouble keeping her mind off physical intimacy. She found herself daydreaming about the cabin, longing for Tyler's attention. She didn't want to get involved with anyone besides Tyler, but working at a college meant she was around young, attractive men all day. She found herself fantasizing about men she knew at work and was starting to feel vulnerable to any good-looking man's attention. Before her affair, Diane had barely noticed the men she worked with. She wasn't a particularly physical person and didn't concern herself with that aspect of life much. But since she'd started her affair, engaging in regular, passionate encounters with a young, experienced lover, she found she couldn't live without it anymore. When her frustration grew to an uncomfortable level, she decided to end her self-imposed celibacy. During her weekly workout, she let Tyler know she was available again. She made it clear she wanted to restart their relationship, and he was ready as well. They kept their distance from each other that day, maintaining an appearance of professionalism. When he escorted her to her car, the two lovers made plans to meet the following week to resume their affair. Rob had mentioned some business meeting that day, which would give her a few precious hours to slip away. Diane went home with a spring in her step and a sparkle in her eyes. She felt her whole attitude improve as she spent the evening with her husband. Dinner was once again rather quiet. There was nothing she could put her finger on, but Rob seemed more somber than usual. Conversation was subdued, but she ignored the feeling that there was anything particularly unusual about that. He'd been distant for weeks now. He didn't seem to want a physical relationship with her anymore, but with the prospect of seeing Tyler next week, she put her frustrations aside. As Rob moped around the house and seemed to be avoiding her, Diane gave him his space and tried to keep the atmosphere between them friendly. Her good mood continued into Friday at work. Even her supervisor commented on her upbeat attitude and asked what it was all about. "Oh, nothing special," Diane replied, smiling. "Everything has been working out for me lately. I'm just pleased with how well my life is going right now." "Did Rob get a promotion? Or did you hit the lottery?" the woman asked with a chuckle. "Maybe you're having a second honeymoon or something. Whatever it is, I haven't seen you this content in years." "Nothing like that," Diane replied with a slight smirk. "I appreciate everything I have and just realize how lucky I am. Things are perfect. Well, they certainly could be a lot worse." "That's a great attitude," her supervisor said warmly. "I wish everybody thought like that, Diane." Diane went home after work feeling on top of the world. She couldn't wait for her meeting with her lover in a few days. She was so eager that she wanted to take a cold shower the second she got home to calm herself down. The smell of something delicious was coming from the stove when she walked into the kitchen. She was quite pleased that Rob had already prepared dinner for them. When she arrived, she gave him a big hug and was pleasantly surprised when he hugged her back and kissed her cheek. "This is wonderful, Rob," she gushed as she appraised the meal. "Would you like some wine with dinner, honey?" "Yes, I'll take a glass," she said, adding suggestively. "But I don't want to get too sleepy, because I want to reward you later for making such a delicious meal." "Your smile is reward enough for me, darling." "Oh no," she giggled. "I'm going to give you something a lot better than a smile tonight. It's been a long time since we've been together, and I want to show my wonderful husband how much I love him." Rob pasted a smile on his face and replied, "I think you're wonderful too." They ate and conversed normally for a change. Diane was pleased that Rob seemed to be coming out of his shell. She found the dinner and pleasant conversation a welcome relief from the somber tone of their interactions lately. Later, after cleaning up the dishes, which they did together, husband and wife went to the living room to watch some television. It was their regular routine, but tonight, with her upbeat attitude, Diane was determined to be affectionate with her husband. It had been weeks without any physical contact, and she missed it. Despite his age, Rob was still an attractive, healthy man, no doubt with needs that weren't being met. Despite having a lover on the side, she still wanted to satisfy her husband's needs and was determined to do just that tonight. "Thank God he's in a good mood for a change," she thought. She touched Rob's arm and excused herself during a commercial. She went to the bedroom and changed into more revealing clothing. She knew he'd always found her attractive in casual wear. She pulled a thin tank top from the dresser along with a pair of fitted shorts. The tank top would leave her toned arms and shoulders bare, and the shorts fit snugly over her hips. Feeling bold, she removed her bra and left it off. She put on the outfit and looked in the mirror, smiling at how appealing she looked. Even at her age, she looked fit and attractive. She was positive Rob would be pleased. With so much on display and her eager attitude, there was no way he'd refuse her tonight. With a confident smile on her face, she could hardly wait to join Rob on the sofa. Her mind was set as she headed back to the living room. Rob was in the kitchen when she returned, so she sat down on the sofa, arranged herself attractively, and waited. He came into the room with a beer and another glass of wine for her. She flashed him an inviting smile and patted the seat next to her. His eyebrows raised when he saw what she had on. She could feel anticipation building as he returned to his seat next to her. "I filled your glass," he told her, handing her the wine. "I hope you wanted more." "Yes, I'm definitely in the mood for some," she said, trying to give him as many hints as she could. "I'm in the mood for something else too, darling." "I can see," he said with amusement. She knew she looked appealing and available. Knowing how attractive she looked was getting her rather worked up. She rarely felt this drawn to her husband, so tonight was probably the most attraction she'd felt toward him in months. She could only imagine the reaction Tyler would have if he saw her like this. But while she wanted her husband to desire her, she didn't want to seem too forward. It was important to her ego to let Rob make the first move. So she sat next to him, giving him plenty to appreciate, hoping he'd take the initiative. Instead, he just stared at the television. After a while, she moved closer. The television droned on as she sipped her wine and tried to press herself against him. At one point, she let her head fall onto his shoulder and began to rub his arm. She knew he had to realize she was interested, but why didn't he respond? It was during the next show that she began to feel tired. She was frustrated with her unresponsive husband and tried to remain receptive to any move he would make. The voices on the television were monotonous, and the wine was making her sleepy. She didn't know that Rob had dissolved a sleeping pill in her wine. It wasn't long before Diane was having trouble keeping her eyes open. Pretty soon, she dozed off. It was dark when she woke up on the sofa. There was a blanket covering her, the television was off, and Rob was gone. "What the hell?" she mumbled sleepily. The clock on the wall said 4 in the morning. Still half asleep, she got up and stumbled into the bedroom. Rob was in bed, sound asleep. Damn him, she thought irritably. What's the matter with him? Without changing into her nightgown, Diane crawled into bed next to him, feeling very weary, and quickly fell back asleep. The next day, she was bitter about his lack of attention. She'd given him every opportunity, and he'd just ignored her. His loss, she thought angrily. She got up and realized it was nearly noon. The sun was already out, and Rob was in the kitchen. "Morning, honey," he said as she entered the room. "Want some coffee?" "Yeah, sure," she answered without enthusiasm. "What happened last night?" "You fell asleep," he told her, smiling. "I guess you had a hard week and you were tired. You looked so peaceful. I didn't want to disturb you. You should have woken me up." "I know, but—" "Well, you know," he replied vaguely. "By the way, Diane, why don't we get away for the weekend?" "Get away?" "Yeah. Let's go up to the cabin for a couple of days," he suggested with a grin. "We've both been working hard lately and haven't spent much time together." Diane was still sleepy and a little confused. She took a sip of her coffee and tried to clear her mind before answering. "The cabin? We haven't been there in years." "I know, but we could use a little time together, you know? It's so quiet there. I bet we could have a lot of time to reconnect and, have some fun." "Fun?" Diane's mind cleared, and her eyes opened wider. Was he hinting at intimacy? After leaving her frustrated last night, she wasn't expecting this. "Fun?" "Yeah," Rob chuckled. "I know I'm not that romantic, but if we got away from our normal routine, maybe something would click. It's just for the weekend. We both have to work on Monday, but it could be fun. How about it?" She shrugged her shoulders. "I guess so. We'll have to go to the store and get some things. I already have everything we need. I went shopping yesterday." "Well, aren't you the Boy Scout? Always prepared?" She giggled. "Yeah, have to be prepared," he laughed back. "I think we should just clean up, get dressed, and head out. Let's start our weekend right now." Diane was becoming more enthusiastic the more she thought about it. Why not? A weekend away in the mountains with her husband might get their relationship back on track. The way he was talking, she might even get to be close to him. "Okay, let me get changed and I'll pack a bag." "Great," Rob exclaimed, grinning eagerly. "I already have my stuff packed. I'll put it in the car, and we can head out shortly." On the way to the cabin, Diane tried to use her cell phone to send a text and found it wasn't working. "Oh, darn it," she said, pressing buttons on the phone. I thought it was charged up, but I guess the battery is dead. That's okay, sweetheart. You can use mine if you want. No, that's okay. It's nothing important. I'll just wait until we get to the cabin and charge it up. Okay. An hour and a half later, they were at the cabin, putting food in the small refrigerator and making sandwiches. Diane was happy but a little tentative as she entered the cabin. Her eyes were darting around, scanning the place for any indication of her affair. But as she and Rob made themselves at home, she didn't see anything unusual, and he didn't seem to notice anything either. They finished eating, then took a walk around the lake. They talked and laughed, savoring the beautiful surroundings. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall Douglas firs, and the air smelled of pine and fresh mountain water. Rob held her hand as they walked, pointing out various things he wanted her to see. He even hugged her a couple of times and caught her once when she tripped on an exposed root. He was friendlier than he'd been in months, and Diane was thrilled. It was so nice that she almost felt guilty. She'd been planning to meet Tyler at this very place next week. The afternoon was wonderful, and the evening even better. Diane hadn't felt this close to her husband in a long time. Once they were back in the cabin, she took a chance and kissed him. He didn't refuse her affection. When it grew dark, Rob put on some music, and they opened a bottle of wine. As they drank, he told funny stories about events from years past in their marriage. Diane was pleasantly relaxed from the alcohol and moved closer to him. When he accepted her in his arms and wrapped them around her slim body, she felt her anticipation begin to build. The romantic atmosphere continued when they went to bed. Instead of lying apart as they did at home, tonight they lay side by side, gently kissing and touching each other. Diane was very excited at the prospect of finally being close to her husband again. "It's been so long," she murmured. "Please, honey, don't hold back anymore. I'm yours." "You are?" he teased. "God, yes. Can't you tell?" She tried to concentrate on her husband, but couldn't help comparing this slow, relaxed romantic encounter with the raw passion she shared with her lover. Both were exciting and enjoyable, but what she was experiencing right now was more fulfilling. Rob loved her so much and was showing it with everything he said and did. On the other hand, Tyler just wanted physical pleasure. There was no love involved between them, she knew that. He simply treated her as a source of excitement. She enjoyed the young man's attention, but she had to admit she'd never trade that for what she was experiencing right now. She wasn't sure what time it was when she heard a noise outside. It must have been nearly 10 o'clock, which was early for them to go to bed. But out here in the remote mountains, with no television to watch, going to bed early seemed natural. A moment later, there was another suspicious noise. Her senses heightened, and she felt Rob stiffen and sit up. "What was that?" he whispered with alarm. "Is someone outside?" "I don't know," she whispered back. There was another noise. It sounded like someone was on the porch. With wide eyes watching the door, Diane sat up next to her husband. She was suddenly afraid. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. Rob pushed the covers back and crept quietly out of bed. "You wait here," he told her firmly. "I'll go check it out." Suddenly the doorknob was rattling, and Diane's hand went to her mouth. She was terrified. Rob moved to his bag and removed something. Before she could see what it was, she heard the front door swing open. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw a dark shadow of a figure at the door, and she realized someone was breaking in. She screamed in panic. The next second, there was a bright flash and a deafening blast. A second later, there was another blast, and Diane realized her husband had fired a weapon at the intruder. From the bedroom, she heard the man grunt and collapse on the floor. She screamed again, unable to believe what was happening. As she sobbed hysterically, the room went quiet. "Oh my God!" she cried out, her hands covering her face. Rob moved cautiously toward the fallen man, keeping the pistol trained on him as he approached. After a moment, he checked for a pulse to see if the man was still alive. He moved cautiously to the open door and went outside to make sure the intruder was alone. He came back in, went to the light switch and turned it on. It was at that second when Diane's life changed forever. Her brain seemed to slow down. Her eyes widened in shock, and her heart stopped. The man on the floor was Tyler. She was sobbing and nearly incoherent when Rob came to her side. He pulled her head to his chest to console her and whispered softly, "It's all over now, honey. Don't worry. We're safe." Diane's thoughts were jumbled in confusion. Her husband held her gently, whispering reassurances. "We have to call the police," he finally said after a few minutes. "They're going to want to investigate this. Just stay here." Diane collapsed on the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Rob gazed grimly at his sobbing wife, waiting patiently until she went to the bathroom to be sick. She was still in the bathroom when he retrieved her cell phone, opened it up, and pulled the tape off the battery contacts he'd placed there earlier. He then put it back in her purse. He went to the body and removed an envelope from the man's jacket. Inside the envelope was a note Rob had printed at a library computer in a town 2 hours away and placed on Tyler Brennan's car earlier that morning. With a bitter expression, he read it one last time. "This coupon is good for tonight only. Please bring it with you and redeem it for an evening of passion. Sorry for the short notice, but I just found out he's away this weekend. Can you meet me at the cabin, lover? I hope so, and I'll make it well worth your while. Your devoted 304. Rob crumpled up the note and went outside. Tyler's car was in the driveway. The cabin was in a cellular dead zone, so it was hard to get a good signal. He called to his wife, "Be right back, Diane. I'm trying to get the police, but I'm having trouble getting a signal. Let me go out back and see if I can get through." He moved quickly to the lake, walked to a place he knew was totally concealed by shrubs, and lit the note and envelope on fire with a lighter. He watched the paper turn to ashes, making sure there was nothing left. He then ground the black ashes between 2 rocks and covered them with leaves, leaving no evidence of his carefully planned trap. He took a moment to gain control over his emotions. He'd never harmed anyone before. He'd known this would happen when he placed the note on Tyler's car that morning, but the actual act was more emotional than he'd anticipated. He regretted ending the young man's life in this way, but with the rage he'd felt for so long, he'd known it was inevitable. His hands were still shaking as he made the 911 call to the police. It was now up to him to keep his composure and let this play out. He'd already removed all of the surveillance cameras and hidden the video recordings in a place no one would ever find. It was fortunate he'd kept knowledge of her affair to himself. Once the police began to question his wife, it would all come out. Even if she didn't admit it, it wouldn't be long before the investigators would discover she was a member of the health club where Tyler worked, and her connection to her lover would be established. The police arrived in less than an hour. Rob was waiting for them and admitted he was the one who'd fired the shots. They took his pistol and placed it in an evidence bag. When they asked, he assured them that he hadn't moved or touched the body since the incident. His wife confirmed the same. The officers were immediately suspicious when they discovered the intruder had used the hidden key to open the door. "How did he know it was there?" one officer asked. Rob explained about the key but claimed ignorance about how anyone else would know about it. When they questioned Diane about it, she broke down almost immediately. She admitted she and Tyler had been there before. Rob pretended to be shocked and must have played the role convincingly, because the officers began exchanging knowing glances. They were both taken to the sheriff's station for questioning. The forensic team arrived not long afterward and went over the cabin thoroughly. At the station, Rob called a lawyer he'd worked with occasionally on client matters. At the lawyer's instruction, he told the police he wouldn't say anything more until his attorney arrived. Diane, on the other hand, told them everything. She was so distraught over Tyler's death and confused about how it had happened that she lost all control of herself. The investigators used that as leverage to get her to admit all the details of her month-long affair. Rob didn't mind her confession. She didn't know anything about his plan and couldn't reveal anything incriminating. After a long night and part of the next day, both husband and wife were released but told not to leave the area. After weeks of questions and investigations, nothing incriminating was found regarding the incident. Rob knew the investigators were suspicious, but without evidence, they had to categorize it as a justified use of force. Someone breaking into a home in the middle of the night was certainly a serious crime, and any jury they could convene would likely consider it self-defense. Even if there were unexplained questions, the jury would probably give the homeowner the benefit of the doubt. Rob took his wife home on Sunday. She was a complete mess and apologized profusely for her infidelity until he finally told her to be quiet. He already knew about everything, of course, and managed to keep a bewildered expression on his face as she revealed all the painful details. He felt remorse for having ended the young man's life, but he couldn't see another way to remove him from their lives and regain his dignity. He went to work on Monday, leaving his wife to deal with her own turmoil. She was an emotional wreck when he got home. One of their neighbors was with her to keep her from falling apart completely. That evening, after a brief dinner, he confronted her about the affair. She sobbed the entire time and went through all the typical justifications an unfaithful spouse offers when caught. It was just physical, it wasn't love, she loved him. She would make it up to him if he'd forgive her, please forgive her, and so on. All of her excuses went in one ear and out the other. He had her served with divorce papers on Thursday. At home, she still hadn't returned to work. She nearly collapsed when she was handed the documents. Rob figured the events of that week, losing Tyler and now facing divorce, must have been overwhelming. She was so distraught that he had to take her to the emergency room when he couldn't calm her down. Rob packed a suitcase while Diane sobbed uncontrollably. She kept begging him to stay and forgive her. "What am I going to do now?" she wept. With little emotion, he replied, "I have no idea. We're getting a divorce, Diane. You're not my problem anymore. But I love you. I can't live without you, Rob," she pleaded. When she kept on begging, Rob finally told her coldly, "Just go find another lover, Diane. You seem to have no trouble attracting them. Just make sure it's someone who can give you what you're looking for. Like that man you were seeing." That bitter reply had the woman sobbing inconsolably. He left the house that weekend, never to return. Rob was never charged with a crime, but the authorities continued to watch him and ask people he knew about the incident. With the cloud of suspicion hanging over his head, his career suffered. No one wanted their financial assets handled by someone potentially involved in such a situation. He eventually left his job but found another position at a smaller firm not long after and was able to pay his bills. They sold both the house in Lake Oswego and the cabin. He and Diane split the profits. He received half of the money from the marital assets, as well as the money he'd quietly set aside. However, with her lawyer examining his financial records to determine why their combined assets weren't larger, he had to maintain a lower standard of living and remained cautious about anything that could raise questions. After the incident and the divorce, life for Rob went on. He bought some weights and started an exercise program at home. Soon his fitness improved and he began to lose weight. He kept in touch with his daughter Sarah and visited her when he could. She was very upset about how their marriage had ended and tried to get him to reconsider the divorce. Rob told her gently but firmly that it would never happen. After being betrayed in such a way, there was no chance of reconciliation. Despite his concerns about his attractiveness at his age, Rob did eventually find women to date. They were older, but so was he. Some were even quite attractive and pleasant to be around. It took him a few months to get up the nerve to ask someone out, but it was a relief to meet people, socialize, and enjoy female company again. He didn't want another long-term relationship just yet, but he had a career and many good years ahead. Even at 55, he could still attract attention. During the months after his divorce, he wasn't as lonely as he'd thought he'd be. Unlike his gradual transition back to normal life, Diane's shock at what had happened turned into severe depression, and it took her a very long time to cope with it. Her previously carefree attitude about life and relationships was gone. Her husband, whom she still loved, had divorced her. Her young lover was gone, and she wasn't able to keep her emotions under control enough to move forward. The active lifestyle she'd enjoyed before the divorce disappeared and wasn't coming back. She was seeing a therapist regularly who had her on medication that was helping her cope somewhat. Her health began to decline, so their daughter got her under a doctor's care. She stopped working out and gained considerable weight. She mostly lived the life of a recluse and never went back to the health club that had started all of her troubles. Rob heard from mutual friends that she was planning to move out of state to escape all the gossip about her affair and the tragic events that had followed. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.